Hello, hello. Good to see everybody. Bloop, 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 bloop.
Hello. We hope you're well.
Feel free, of course, to take a look at who's with us today. Looking forward to being with you for a few hours this afternoon. Okay, well, let's get started sitting. So, just as usual, taking a little time to kind of get physically settled into your seated posture. Just knowing it can kind of help to sort of move around a little bit, get a little bit of sense of where you might feel more or less in a stable posture that's not taking a lot of energy to keep maintained upright, but also has some sense of this steady attending, some alertness, some vibrancy. Notice when you start to let the eyes come to close, we have even a different sense of our posture, really how it feels from the inside rather than being focused on the visual element, whether that's really through our eyes, or through a memory or imagined visual impression of the body seated, trying to interpret what we feel and how it looks versus just starting to settle into the direct feeling experience of the body, not concerning ourselves with a outward image. How does the lower part of our body feel settling into our seat, our cushion, our chair, floor? Just noticing in what really is an impersonal way, just the direct sensations, and textures of the materials that are in contact with the skin, a sense of pressure, lightness, heaviness, hardness, softness. It's also part of that connection, contact between the body and another surface, but also something we feel internally. all the different sensations we feel moving up through our bodies, our torso. Be feeling a little more if there is a leaning of the body one way or another. Is that taking energy to maintain? Or any just sense of shifting? The body holds itself up a little more. Of course, a huge range of these sensations, phenomena through the spine and neck, shoulders. They clenched, are they relaxed, are they forward or back, neutral? Not trying to find the so-called perfect posture, but also getting a sense of if slight adjustments might help things feel a little more settled, take a little bit less energy, even unconsciously, to maintain. Even our facial expressions sometimes are results of certain tensions, tightening, contractions. We don't even know what we're doing. Just kind of habit, comfortable, familiar, not worried about breaking habits of this kind. We might relax the face, relax the jaw, neck, and in a few moments notice they're tense again. Not wanting to get into an endless cycle of fixing, correcting, manipulating. But perhaps seeing the way it can help motivate our interest. What is going on here between the mind and the body? Emotions, physical sensation, all through our arms and hands. Sound phenomena arising and passing at the ear door. These vibrations that we can become very sensitive to. Times you can see the ways in which our heads, our whole bodies are contracted in a defensive posture against the impingement of sound. Just doing our best to reassure the body, reassure the mind, of our interest in protecting, caring, understanding. Not overexposing our system to the volatility of all this impingement. Of course, seeing is still happening, even with our eyes closed, smelling, tasting, the mind itself. wandering, wanting, opening, contracting, accepting, resisting. Not trying to flood the gates, trying to overwhelm the system, but still seeking to understand more deeply what's going on here, now, carefully bringing the heart, mind, the body, one moment at a time, to the field of awareness, being honest viewing, honest assessment, honest reckoning, the truth of what we notice, not the goodness or badness of it, just the truth of what's happening. Guided by care, carefulness, curiosity, courage, receiving sounds, receiving the body, the hands, the breath, just acknowledging the presently arisen states that are arising and they're passing, their conditioned nature, and their tendency to condition further experience. Body conditioning mind, mind conditioning body, mind conditioning mind. One moment to the next, nowhere to go in space or in time. Carefully receiving, acknowledging, and letting go. Sensations in the body and the breath is our primary field of attention. But noticing the heart mind when it's clear, when it arises to be noticed. Noticing sounds when they call the attention. Not fighting against reality. Trying simply to find our way through it skillfully. Wisdom, clarity, kindness. Very nice to sit with you all. So, of course, we hope everyone is well, thriving, and surviving. We have time for questions if anyone has any about your practice, about instructions, about anything we've offered recently, talks, teachings, any way we might be able to support you in your formal practice or life practice, uh, whatever that might look like. And so, yes, as usual, the best way to let us know you have a question is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you move your mouse around, there's a button that should say raise hand, like Layla has just done, and we'll know you have a question. Or you can write to me in the chat and let me know you have a question. I can call on you, or wave your real hand in the air, and we'll tend to see that as well. Let me change the setting here. Hey, Layla, I think you can unmute yourself.
Hello, thanks.
Hi, Layla.
Um, so last week, Jesse made just a quick comment about gracefulness being kind of an add-on, and um, and that we can be messy as we work through things. And that really hit home for me. Um, I've spent a lot of time thinking about being graceful. And I think, especially in the context of not dumping or inflicting my pain on other people, um, but I also felt this wave of relief when you said it was okay to be messy. And, um, and I guess I'm just I would love to hear more of both of your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah,
Would you
and I
like
think it'd be cool
a,
to hear more about. We're
yeah,
very good at being
yeah,
ungraceful,
we
and
were just gonna say, we could give you a step-by-step in
or
depth.
write a book about it. And it would be cool to hear too if if you have more to say about like your own
Version.
process with it. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
and
go for it.
I um I don't know that I mean I definitely haven't figured it out. but but I guess it's just something that I think I've seen in other people handle difficulties gracefully, and it's just beautiful. And um and I get, I've had some health issues over the years, like a lot of people have, and um and one of the things that I've learned is to ask for help when I need it. I mean, I'm at least somewhat better at that now than I used to be, and I think that's part of it. I think like sharing my pain can be graceful, but um I don't want to dump it on people. And I think probably what happens a lot of time with me is I just withdraw when I'm trying to avoid dumping my pain on other people. And yeah, I guess um I don't know, is there a graceful way to be messy? Like,
Ah, that's perfect. Right. I mean, I think the other piece of kind of like so much of what you're describing too is there's one thing. The examples you've given, I think often that we talk about, still do have so much to do with other social relationships and um, the impact that our actions and the flavor of them or how they're interpreted by other people, and then the impact on the relationship, that kind of what element that has to do with gracefulness or messiness versus if you trip on your own and no one sees, and you might still kind of give yourself a hard time about it as one example of non-gracefulness, but and a lot of that may be sort of socialized, but maybe the consequences that some of what you're describing really have a lot to do with kind of like, the social consequences of that. And I think that's just such an important part of the dynamic and the strangeness of the pressure, and yet the reality of it. I mean, I think it's also, you know, it does how we do things does have an impact on others, and um, there's a value in being careful about that, and there's also something wonderful about relationships under which like we can be imperfect, and even maybe it can lead to conflict or it can lead to discomfort, but that there's something about the relationship that's strong enough to be able to be committed enough to work through it, or not judge kind of ultimately in a way that's really dismissive or something like that. So I think that you know probably many of us have in our lives like different roles are in where the measure of gracefulness or messiness feels like it matters more, and where the stakes seem higher or lower. And I think everyone probably really appreciates those places where there's relationships of whatever kind that are, we can be messier, and on the other hand, those are also the relationships we don't necessarily want to tax as much by some of kind of, maybe the part of what you're describing of just kind of dumping either, so I think it's such a really wonderful question, and I don't, I mean, I think that it's interesting in the meditation practice how we still have these expectations of ourselves, and how we still kind of relate to ourselves, or it's possible to relate to ourselves with a lot of like kind of perfectionism and judgment, and not allowing for something that's less controlled, uh, not the person we want to be or be perceived as. And that's very humbling to see that, of course, in ourselves. And it's also amazing when we can start to feel more at ease with that, because the outer relationships is, it's its own project in terms of how messy or not we can be, or how we can recover from, I mean, I think that it's like you're describing, there's ways of being messy that actually are healthy and really good, and like it's being honest, and it's not just so like tightly controlled, and then of course there's ways of doing it that can be destructive, and we kind of let loose on something that we're not careful with our behavior, and we harm someone, um, and so it's not to say that there's like 100% good or bad. There's so many variables, but that in our own meditation practice we can kind of have this sometimes strange paradox of being on one hand very ambitious and wanting to be able to be more awakened and more, and the side of like that kind of gracefulness that's not just like aesthetic, but that's like profound, right? That it's like it's not just like, well, we look very elegant in terms of our internal world or our external world, but that we actually like something actually doesn't bother us, or we actually have such a relationship with it that it dissolves or something, that there's such a perfect attunement to what's happening internally and externally, that I think there's something in that can be called kind of graceful, and um, and so I think that ultimately requires building a relationship with things that are difficult, to have a relationship with, and that is going to not be graceful. Like the process of that is going to be, sloppy or uncontrolled or messy. We're going to cling to things, or we're going to reject them, or we're going to try to rehearse them, or we're going to do all the things we do internally with an emotion or a physical experience that's difficult, or something even persistent, right? Like illness or something. And the places where we accept it, the places where we are resistant to it, one moment to the next, it can change, So we'll have these what can feel like some moments of grace, not just gracefulness, right? But of like, and then other moments where we're really in the thick of it. And I think that's also a huge part of the practice. It's like, wow, when things come together and there's equanimity and there's concentration and interest and kindness and all of these kind of things come together for a little bit, and there's something so powerful in terms of the clarity and the balance of mind that we can feel. And then other times where we're not, and also there's the ways where you can see that as not a personal messiness either. It's like, oh, the conditions are not supportive of an equanimous response, for example, and then we take the lesson of that, we learn it, we digest it, and we have to, the growth doesn't happen if we're not allowing ourselves to make mistakes. And you can't not. That's maybe part of maybe what's maybe a little bit foolproof in the practice over the long term, is that it's not that glamorous, and it's like, oh, you're just gonna end up slogging through for a while at times. So I don't know. That's just sort of kind of one take on it. I don't know, Michelle, I'm sure you have some thoughts. And you're muted, Michelle, still.
There was a teacher named Ruth Dennison that would often say in her accent, self-knowledge is no good news, darling. Self-knowledge is no good news, darling. And I think that's a great description of practice and feeling messy. I think that it's essential, as Jesse says, it's essential to acknowledge how messy this process of purification is. And so we can explain it in terms of Vedana, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and then mindfulness being the intention to understand rather than to judge the experience, right? It's like when that intention to understand is there, whether we're feeling messy inwardly or outwardly, it's like night and day. Yeah, there's this space that opens up around like being identified with our thoughts as mine and me or yours, or it's like ours, but there's this it's just messy when we're ping-ponging or boomeranging off aversion and attachment inwardly and outwardly. It's like, and you can see when it's aversion or fear that is not being attempted to be understood in this way. Of course it leads to blame, like self-blame and scapegoating, and just that the pain, the unpleasantness of being so identified with aversion, without any kind of interest in it, and the real messiness of being identified with attachment or delusion without any interest in it. So yeah, I like the unconditional acceptance of messiness And not being attached to when it feels graceful, to me, is the key, of all of this. That, it's so humbling, right? The there's so much to be said. This is like something you untangle in our lives, over and over. The additional thing I would add, because Jesse really kind of pointed to so much, is well, maybe two things. One is having patience with this process, patience and humility, not only ours, but knowing that each individual human is struggling with this stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's a whole other level or dimension of when we're triggered, right? So I'm not even referring to when we're just dealing with aversion, attachment, and delusion, kind of within that range of day-to-day normal. But then when the difference, when we're triggered and we're just really identified and really lost in it, that's my definition of messy. I don't even include the other stuff, really. That's like normal, right? But when we're really identified and we're really sure that the other person's wrong, or that we're not interested in what's going on with the other person. We just want to, that's dumping. Dumping is when we just don't want to, we just want to be right, and the other person to ask forgiveness. So, boy, I just feel, and I'm not even at the place with this yet where I'd like to get to, because there's all those levels. And this is when I think it's actually helpful sometimes to withdraw, is when we're so identified, or you find somebody who is willing to go through it with you. There are the people that are safe, or relatively safe friends, or you can ask if they're in a relatively safe place to talk about it. Okay, so there's levels, right? Kind of normal, triggered. And then I think there's the level where, for all of us, as we go through our years of practice, where a new layer of purification can come up. Or there's an outer circumstance that's very intense for us, very difficult, or illness, whatever it is. And have to go into it messy. It's like there's no other way to get liberated with it, but to kind of hold your nose and jump in and drown.
Yeah.
That really feels messy. I mean, that's a bona fide, there's no doubt, right, that one is in it. And everything that Jesse and I say about taking walks and taking a bath, and, watching a movie, or, they're really important to really change the channel enough to, get caught in the black hole or the whirlpool of ness of it. But it's actually part of growth. You can't avoid these things. They're just necessary. Meaning it comes up identified, right? It comes up identified. Or you're really trying to understand something about yourself that you're going into the content from something when you're 3 years old, and you're trying to understand it. And it's taking every single tool you have to try to make sense of it. That usually will feel messy.
I feel like so right now I'm thinking about, and maybe they're not two different kinds of messiness, but that's kind of how I'm thinking about it right now. And one kind of messiness where you might dump on somebody else is when you're trying to prove that you're right, or something like that. And the other type of messiness that I kind of came into this with is more of like a feeling of hopelessness. And yeah.
That's a good
Yeah.
one. That's a really good one.
I mean,
Very
I
no,
think
that's
what's
a really
cool is
important.
like, yeah, what you pointing to in some ways is, and I think the conversation is like, Michelle touched on it, but a lot of these end up leading to what are some of the hardest emotions:
Yeah.
shame,
Yeah.
hopelessness,
Yeah.
right? Like we'll just say those two. Those are like two of the hardest things,
Yeah.
and they're very much related to something about this question of behavior, how it's interpreted, how it feels internally. I mean, again, whether it's internal or external, but it's very loaded, and I think and it's always loaded. We're living in times where there's so much at stake around sort of like communication, whether it's individuals or in group settings or social media, and like that there are social consequences to being messy, in different ways, and those can be very real, uh, and so that heightened pressure and tension is not necessarily something that leads to a feeling of like, oh, I can healthily explore this or something, I mean, it really feels like the stakes are so high, and that's not helpful, I mean, it's really it's maybe there are some things that are helpful about it in terms of like, communication is real. It's not, it is a form of action, and so that there's something that we take seriously about it, um, and there's another side to it, of course, where it's like just wild, so yeah, I mean, I think it's like it's funny to feel all the ways that we can sort of go in it, and I there's a um there's a great quote from Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj. I'm sure I wouldn't be able to find if I tried to look for it, but someone's asking him about thoughts and like overwhelming thoughts, and how do I work with them, you know, uh, and the sort of just persistent flood of thought, something along those lines. And and Nisargadatta basically offers he's like, if you were crossing a busy street in the middle of the city, like you wouldn't argue with everyone you bump into, right? You would just cross the street and you would like weave your way through. And that's what you should do with your thoughts. And I was like, wow, that's what a great metaphor, because there is a way in which we actually do try to argue with everyone we're crossing the street with, right? Whether literally or just like our lives or in whatever kind of context, there is this way in which it's like it is or our own thoughts, that there is this sort of like we're trying to engage each one as like this intense thing versus like, okay, we're just trying to get across the street, you know. And I and that and the reality of like how we learn to do that, some of it is, sometimes it's a kind of discipline, sometimes it really is just this sort of disenchantment that comes through the process of being messy over and over and over again with the way we're dealing with this flood of experience, and at some point there is just, I think that we all, the important thing is to know we have that sense of gracefulness, of skillfulness, of ease, of equanimity, of, we know that that's possible because it's happened at times, and it's conditioned, and that those conditions are, hard to kind of put together or not that common necessarily, but that it's possible, so I still don't think, there's still something important about that understanding that it's like, well, we do seek to be more free, and we do seek to be more peaceful and caring, and um, have more ease, and some part of it has to the way disenchantment works, which is like the one way of looking at the letting go of the push and pull with everything, and the conflict or the grasping or whatever it is that we're doing with everything, is through doing it and seeing ultimately some of, the dissatisfying qualities that come of it, you know. And then the other places where, yeah, it's like it is amazing how some relationships can grow through conflict and, asking forgiveness and heal. You know, the healing can happen and learning can happen in the ways that are between people and groups of people that you know are amazing and are real as well. So it's not to say there isn't also a value in that.
Yeah.
One more.
Hmm.
Um, so I think there's the disenchantment leads to more liberation. And when we get overwhelmed by pain, often there's doubt. And we talked about that last week, but there's like the recipe for doubt is always you kind of look back when if you're falling into hopelessness, there's definitely been doubt, right? Like you start to get the recipe, and it's like you go back at least to see that one has been overwhelmed by some kind of pain, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, and you feel defeated by it. And it's just, we have to just understand what we get defeated by is being identified with the aversion to it. That's all it is. But I don't want to minimize that the track for a lot of people will be you believe it, right? You believe the doubt, you feel defeated. And of course that leads to hopelessness. You feel gun shy, you feel weaker. You get stronger through disenchantment. You feel weaker through not understanding doubt. So that, like, it's very important with this stuff that sometimes messiness leads to hopelessness. It's okay. Like, if you start to understand it, it's an impermanent thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but if one doesn't understand it, it's really depressing. And then I think that I went through this so many times in these early 3-month retreats where I'd see that that thing happen. And I'd go, there's a recipe for this, but I would usually have bottomed out. The recipe, like I'd already been through the mercilessness, merciless self-hatred, the hopelessness, and then I'd hit the bottom and I'd go, wow, there's no place to go now. Like there's no place to go but up. Like it would just be so cool that I would watch that like amazing downwardness until like it's like, and then I'd be like, oh, because I'd be aware of it, right? I was so quiet. So I can speak to that recognition of impermanence of it.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't, it's a strange way to speak about it, but I find that hopeful. I find it very hopeful to understand the pattern. Very few people want to talk about that bottoming out of hopelessness or shame. It's not like a popular discussion usually, but it's actually important because it's the place where we've taken it. We've taken all that's happened is we haven't been able to be mindful of pain. Or kind. That's the only, but we take it so personally. And then we feel like a failure and we're never gonna, you know,
I do remember a kind of a turning point when I recognized the impermanence. That was
great.
huge. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And and part of asking for help was finding people who I felt safe with. And yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I just can't imagine that anyone who's aware of what's happening right now on the planet isn't swinging into these places once in a while. Like if you're connected, if you have the willingness to be connected with pain and you're practicing compassion and wisdom and all the Brahma Viharas, of course you're going to bottom out sometime.
Yeah.
That's the courage, that's the bravery, you know.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Karen. Oops.
Hi. I so I had my surgery on June 17th, and I'm supposed to be recovered, but my throat is really tight and I'm having difficulty swallowing. Not a lot, but enough, and I get hoarse. And so on a week ago, Monday, I had a swallow test, and Friday I'm going in for a endoscopy dilation, which is basically they put a tube down there and they try to stretch your esophagus, so that he said it was the right leg was a little tight, was the comment of the of the surgeon. Yeah, no shit. But anyway, so that's happening Friday, and which I've had a lot of endoscopies, and everybody, including Google, says that it's 20 to 25 minutes and has a really good rate, not much complications and stuff. You can get a tear, but that's very unusual. And meanwhile, other things are happening to my body, and that is that I'm in quite a lot of pain, and I wake up with a lot of pain. It's worse in the morning. As I go through the day with Tylenol, it gets better. And I think you answered part of this in the last question, but so I asked my guidance, how to get through this, and it said you have to be patient, even though that's not your style. Well, style is a moderate word for patience to me. It's kind of anathema, and I don't know how to do it. And I really have had to give up exercising and everything, because with this, whatever I have, it just I'm pretty debilitated. And I get up and make breakfast, and then I'm exhausted. And it's just sort of endless. And I go through pretty bad depression bouts, and then I feel trapped by it. There doesn't seem to be a way. I'm working with my primary doctor and stuff. I might be having a reaction to a medicine that basically practically saved my life. I've been taking it for almost 6 years, but it might be that, and what does that mean? And so I'm not meditating very well. And I'm just, when you mentioned patience in the last answer, I thought, oh, there it is, I don't know if I'm beating myself up. I don't think a lot, but I think that I'm just so discouraged. I mean, it just feels endless. I've basically been sick this whole year. And I've had little spurts where I was better. After the surgery, I actually started feeling better. I was walking, I did some stairs, and then all of a sudden this thing came on, and my PT says she's never seen me so tired or so, and so I'm just telling you all this because usually you tell me something that I can latch on to a little bit and feel a little better, and feel hope in some bigger way. I have a little bit, but it's pretty dim. So I guess I'll just leave it at that, Makes me cry. So
I have a joke. I have a joke that you might not find funny, but I always say to people that are having trouble with patience that I used up my allotment by the time I was born. So I feel like I was given an allotment and it was gone by the time I was born dead. It was just like, it was so hard in the womb that I used it all up. I don't, there's none. So that's where, when I teach about patience, it's always about being mindful of impatience. Forget. So, I mean, with someone with my background, it's not like I try to say to people, be patient. It's more like try to understand how it is to be impatient.
Mm.
So I would say that my older sister is in a very similar situation. I think she's a few years ahead of you with this stuff, but I have watched her get through this, and it's kind of like miraculous, but a lot of it is like encouraging her to not feel like she has to not be grumpy or like okay, like with what's happening. And then I've watched her go through these stages where she's going through stuff, and then she'll find like in I know I know a kind of surrender is going to happen because she'll go, I have no choice. I have no choice. And then of course I know that's getting close to accepting that she has no choice, right? And then in a week or two, it's stabilized again. And it really is. Like she's accepted that she's grumpy and she's not able to swallow and blah blah, like um and she watches a lot of TV because she's in a wheelchair all the time. She can't move. I'm not saying that's going to happen to you because I don't think it is. But what I think is happening is when we have what's going on for you, all your energy is going into healing. You're not even making those choices. It's often unconscious. But it's good. When we're that tired, all the energy is going into healing, and all the energy is getting ready to go through this thing Friday. It's like you're going to make it through it, but it's okay for it to be really ungraceful inwardly. Really, it's like, how could you not be like impatient? I mean, I hope you didn't take offense at my joke, but it's true. It's like I have to work with mostly impatient.
I think I might have used mine up in the womb too. So,
Right,
or at least by the first 2 months, it was forget it. I can't be
right.
patient with this crap.
I know, right. Well, that's my conditioning. That's your conditioning. It's okay.
Yeah. I don't know that I'm beating myself up for being impatient. Maybe I am, but I'm just saying it's just, I don't know how to I don't know how to get through one day at a time. I'm trying to do one day at a time, a little bit, but I don't know how to do it because I'm hurting and I'm not swallowing well and I can't eat what I want to eat. And, when I do eat, it feels all tight and so I guess you're there.
Yeah, I mean you probably don't know how to go through it because you haven't ever gone through it. It's
Thank
like
God.
when I broke my sacrum, it was definitely like
God.
it was 5 minutes at a time.
Yeah.
5 minutes at a time.
Yeah. I can't
Five.
imagine. I've had a
Yeah, well,
sacrum
it's
out
just
and I can't imagine what it was
it
like to have a
it
broken.
it's unpleasant. It's painful. Yeah, and then you see the bandwidth, one's bandwidth really, gets tight.
Very tight.
Yeah. But I really have to say, I whittled it down to getting through 5 minutes at a time.
Mm.
So it's just really shortening it and shortening it. Because in some ways, what mindfulness is getting through one moment at a time.
Mm.
And one day is way too long. When you do retreats, you see that if you try to be mindful all day, forget it. You can't get through one day.
Yeah.
It's too long.
Yeah. I can barely get through my mornings, which are the hardest time.
And
So,
you probably don't have the usual props to, when you can't exercise, you probably can't do caffeine, whatever. All the things that prop us up when you can't do them, it's a bummer. It's a bummer.
yeah. And it hurts. I've always had a strong body, so, I realized when I turned 80, it just went away. And so, I just,
It's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing and a curse to have a strong body all through life. Because
yeah,
when you hit this stuff, you're not used to it.
yeah, when I was young in my pretty horrible childhood, the only thing I could do was get away from them and go be in my body. And that was my temporary solution. I had to go back, but I could, ride my bike like a crazy person and, do all sorts of things, and I could get and feel the energy coursing through my body. I don't have any energy in my body now.
It's a really good point. This is a very good point. Maybe the most important thing you've said. So it's really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I very much appreciate your wisdom. I didn't wish you to go through things like this, but the fact that you have, and you have lived at 5 minutes at a time, gives me hope that I can live 5 minutes at a time.
I think you can. Yeah, you can. And when you can't, you have to do it anyway. That's the
Yeah,
hard part.
yeah,
That's the hard part is you don't feel you can and then you have to. It's really, but I I think when you get a little more space in here, my sister had to go through that. It helped.
yeah,
It helped.
good.
And my sister is hell on wheels when she has to go. I mean, she's hell on wheels if she has to go to get something done.
I've
So,
I've had so many endoscopies, but I'm sort of terrified of just going in there again.
right.
Anesthesia, all that, you know.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you.
Yeah. That was a real pep talk, huh?
Yeah, I think it's what I needed. I like the idea of losing patience in the womb because, my mother never wanted me anyway, so,
Exactly.
there
Yeah.
you have it. So, thank you.
Well, just first, Karen, I'm sorry. Yeah, sounds really hard. And I think that, that piece of the many things Michelle offered, just to reiterate that you can't overstate how hard it is for to get the mind out of feeling like it's drowning with the body, with the unpleasant physical sensations, and that when it's so predominant and it's happening at different levels, and there's kind of different things going wrong, and it's there's no it's just, you can't overstate how hard that is to try to manage, because you're having to do all kinds of levels of like practical management, future planning and thought, but never mind just like the mindfulness, and but I do just want to encourage, one thing I want to say of like in a very general way, and I think it's common to a lot of us, is sometimes in this world of different spiritual practices, you will hear like people critique sometimes like meditation, or Vipassana, because it's like people say it's like, well, it's not, people aren't in their bodies, it's all in the mind, it's all mind centered, um, But often I say from our experience, we see that people who are doing a lot of body-based practices, whether it's yoga or running or physical, like there's a way that you can seem like you're being in your body, but really you're overriding a kind of sensitivity in it, right? As we may need to, right? For all kinds of reasons in our lives, there may be reasons why it is overwhelming. And then when you're hit with something, a sickness, an illness, an accident, or whatever, and you actually have to simply just sit in your body and just be and walk and try to cook and try to do these things, eat and go to the bathroom and these like basic human things that are actually hard to do, that kind of you can't run from it, in the way that maybe we've trained our ability to do that, of like, oh, to work through things and feel good in the body. And there is a blessing in that, because the body is dukkha. It's like that shouldn't be forgotten ultimately, right? That it is undependable, that it actually is hopeless, that you're not wrong for feeling hopeless in the
Mm.
body because it is decomposing, it is going to die. That is like inevitable. And that even though there's pleasant that we can experience in the body, thank goodness, and that we have that buoyancy that's possible for many of us in parts of our lives, that the ultimate nature of that is not sustainable, right? Whether it's through illness or sickness or injury or whatever. And so what I would say is like that isn't a sign of any failure. I mean, you might not need to hear that, but just the reminder, it's like this is just the way things are, and no one can gloss over how hard that is, how seemingly impossible that fact is of the dukkha of the body and the real hopelessness of it, in terms of the bigger picture. Doesn't mean we can't heal. It doesn't mean things don't get better, we don't resolve things, and it doesn't mean that it's only going to sort of just get incrementally worse. I mean, it's not, but ultimately it's going to fail. Um, but I think it is also easy to, or it can be easy for some people to be very casual about that versus what you're describing is like the horribleness of it and the terror and the fear and the worry and anxiety and just the discomfort, just the plain old discomfort, never mind all like the emotional stuff that it brings up, and how hard it is to get a clear head amidst just like a day of pain. So it's just that both like the acknowledgement of how hard it is and that it's, to not forget that that is also what there's that is what everything about this teaching is pointing to, is what the truth of what you're describing, and that is not a cause for hopelessness, that it is a potential cause for liberation, right? That it's a potential doorway for you to understand that the mind is actually not subject to those same uh, inevitability of decline, right? That that it can happen. There's ways of not making progress in our lives and our spiritual lives, but that you actually can through it. And sometimes it is a crisis that brings us to being more invested in our spiritual lives, right? To seeing the possibility there of actually peace and happiness and spiritual development, when other things are falling apart, whether it's our bodies or conditions around us. I mean, you talk about it feels like you're in a prison, and it's like that's so weighty, it's so powerful and intense to feel that and to express that. And, there are people in prison and they have to find a way to keep going,
Or
right?
they
They
liberate themselves in prison.
in the mind, right? And maybe in their bodies or whatever ways, but there's still right, like there's still a way to move forward, right, with integrity. And that those are like some such beautiful examples we have of people who have made such powerful transformations in prison, um,
Nelson
and
Mandela, among others.
exactly right, exactly. George Jackson. I mean, there's plenty, right?
Yeah.
And so, it's a different kind of prison. It's a different kind of hardship, and it's totally fair and it's totally just for you to be upset about it. Definitely, like we would never, and be impatient and frustrated and sad and grief, all the all the things, and that none of that actually excludes your like, yeah, digging in and the deepening of like, okay, this is an opportunity to to be like, well, what is pain? What is all this? What is the emotional stuff that gets brought up when we're not able to control our bodies or run from the physical reality that we're facing? And it calls on the deepest parts of ourselves, and it's like you're courageous to do it. And it's, we're rooting you on, and it's been nice to kind of get, track some of this over the last months, and for you to kind of be able to check back in, and just you're not able always to see one isn't always able to see from your own perspective of that sense of what is actually growing, right? A determination, a softening of the heart. You might think that it's like you're getting more hopeless, but sometimes there's a real humbleness and a vulnerability that also is really beautiful, that comes alive. And so to not think that those things aren't happening, or you might not see it, or you might not value it, but that it is, you're doing it. And sometimes, yes, a little encouragement, a little reminder of like, yes, this is it, this is the path. And you're, someone, I don't know if they really say this, but someone said in that one Tibetan lineage, they say, may you encounter appropriate challenges, which is like a kind of beautiful prayer, so you're doing it, it's very inspiring. Really amazing. So yeah, thank you for continuing on, and we are
Thank
rooting for
you
you. Yeah.
so much.
Metta karuna, metta karuna, metta karuna.
And just like you said about Michelle, of like, wow, you're not happy that she went through pain and difficulties, but you see the way that she has grown, used it as food for development, right? That you're going to provide that too. You already have, I'm sure, right? There's a way in which you will, by going through this, you have the opportunity to like show other people in your life, whether it's peers or younger people or older people who like, you're like, look, you could be going through it as gracefully as I am. No mess, or accept the mess, right? And have it be that integrated into the gracefulness. I think it's really cool. Yeah. So thanks.
Thank you.
Mhm. Annie.
Hi, Annie.
Hi. Sorry, I'm dark. I was trying to plug in a lamp and I just couldn't do it. I don't have that much of a pretzel body. Plug in the lamp.
You're shining through.
I've been going through lots of grief lately. I have lots of loss, and I've kind of lost my life to a disabled partner. I mean, lost my choice of a life, and it's been pretty intense since December, since about December, which was the beginning of the worst of the disabilities that won't get better. And she has dementia, so I've been losing that for years, losing the relationship as it was for years. So I've been talking to friends about grief, and I remember, Michelle, you said something about karma in relationship to something that you were going through that was really difficult, and I can't remember what it was. So 3 weeks ago, my 17-year-old dog died, and he was my heart. He was my meta dog. And then Friday, I found out my other dog has cancer. So he's going to have surgery next week. And I don't know anything about it, but it sounds horrible. You know, we don't have a biopsy back. So I've been just crying and crying. And I was in Lion's Roar and I looked up grief, and an article on the 5 remembrances came up, and I read them and I went, oh, okay, this is familiar. I'm of the nature to grow old. There's no way to escape. I'm of the nature to have ill health. I'm of the nature to die. And then I got to all that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape being separated from them. And there was some kind of feeling of equanimity that came over me. I don't know why, but there was just some kind of I hadn't experienced any relief from crying all day until I read that. And then I read number 5, my actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. And I thought, well, I think there might be, I mean, it certainly is, equanimity has phrases that talk about karma or kama. And I thought, well, okay, this is kama. And I guess I'd like to hear you say more about how it is that you find equanimity in kama. I mean, I sort of have, I have a little bit of a finger hold on that, but I'd just like to hear more about that.
Jesse, I can start. I don't know if you want to start, or I think that I think when you really understand the Dhamma, that you get that all any of us are doing is living out kama or karma. Like that's what a lifetime is living out karma. You know, and everything you just the equanimity you found in those phrases that you read, it's like one of the basic Buddha's teachings is the heavenly messengers, or are the heavenly messengers, and that the legend or the story or how, but the sense of him beginning to recognize his own awakening was when he, for the first time, saw a sick person, right? So, and a dead person, and like, and every time he saw, someone sick or ill, dead, dying, he realized that this was going to happen to himself, but everyone he knew, he loved and didn't like. It was like that recognition is called a heavenly messenger. So there's you don't want to minimize or reject crying, but that sense of going from grief, which is part of his teaching, is that when you connect to pain and sorrow, right? It's like if the heart connects, it can fall into grief, but it can also find the care, the pleasant care about the pain, right? That's the compassion. That's one way to live out karma, is finding the compassion and the equanimity with how things are. So it's like you're kind of getting a time in your life where when it rains, it pours. You're getting many heavenly messengers, but the fourth heavenly messenger that was so important was the Buddha to be saw a renunciate. He saw, I love the translation, and I always say I love the translation. He saw someone more peaceful than peace itself. And he like got it. He got, oh, I can get free. Like, and not only could the Buddha get free, he got fully free, right? Like it's like, but that it was like not just the heavenly messengers, they were messengers to getting that he could be peaceful with living out karma, right? So what kind of, it's like we get the practice is all about choice. This is about always choice. It's always freedom is choice. It's choice, it's choice. And that's why I said about my sister, she's like, she's getting that, right? She has no choice. She has to go through what she's going through. She's really trapped. She's in a wheelchair. Yeah, it's like, this is it. And it's, when we don't understand the Vedana, when we don't understand the four heavenly messages, when we don't understand aversion, attachment, delusion, when we don't understand equanimity as peace, it's like for you to take the dog to the hospital, like each moment there'll be a way which you'll have a choice to show up for the living out that karma or not. Yeah. But really, if we think like, well, we're having aversion or sadness or whatever, that's part of living out the karma. That's what Jesse and I are teaching, that the sadness, if you're showing up for the sadness, that is living out karma. And getting liberated with it, right? You're not taking it personally, like you're the it's like freedom does not depend on outer circumstances. It just doesn't.
I mean, I see it I see it in you. I see it in Jesse. I mean, Jesse didn't come to Sangha crying hysterically about his mother's death. I'm sure you feel grief, Jesse, but there's a way in which you really you went through that with grace. Since we're talking about grace, at least from my perspective, seeing you online, I don't know that yet. I don't know that yet. Um,
I I would guess that just that Jesse will have something to say about this, but I would get like when you have a partner that is losing their body and their mind, it's the hardest. It's like it's so hard, it's and I'm going through that process with someone very dear, and the best times are just being like all the responsibility is what's hard, Annie, but the actual being with it is actually beautiful.
yeah.
Oh, see, I knew it.
Well,
That was a test. That was a test. Right. Exactly.
well, they're pretty funny. Things are pretty funny. You just you can't do anything about it. They're just funny. So and sometimes Jan will laugh too at the joke. I mean, it's a joke. At least she doesn't take offense when I laugh, which I'm grateful for because things are just funny. um, So I do. But I did have your voice in my head that said, and I repeated to myself, this is my karma. This is my karma. And I can't not do it. I mean, I can't not be here for this life. It's just the way it is. Um, I can't say that well, there was a certain amount of equanimity with that, I have to say, but I can't say that that's a very steady state for me. The grief and the crying and the, you know, carrying on internally, I can't take this, is still much more common, or I'm so overwhelmed. All that stuff is much more familiar to me than a sort of a calmness about this is my lot. This is my lot in life. I've been saying this is my lot in life, Lelania, and I appreciate the line.
Accepting the sadness is so important.
Mm, there's a couple of things I feel like I that feel important to. I mean, there's so much in it, Annie. It's so there's that basic thing you just said, right? And I remember at Hollyhock at some point going up there, and there's like a walk through the forest. You get to the Damahal, and I remember seeing in the wind once this like these two trees that had grown. They were separate trees side by side, but over time, conditions in the forest and whatever, one had just grown to kind of lean on the other one, you know. And how many years had it been that been the case, before I noticed and see this thing and this kind of like them, swaying together and the creaking and the simple bare fact that this one tree was bearing the weight of the other tree, and there was just no way around it. It is what had happened, and there was nothing that could be done about it from tree side of things, as far as any of us know what you know trees are capable of in terms of that. But there's something very poignant and very real about that felt like that happens, right? That happens in so many ways in our lives, where there are just times where, because of conditions, one of us bears the weight of another of our existences for some time, and that is a heavy burden, right? There is creaking, there is groaning, there is a heaviness to that, so there is that, and there's a beauty in it. you know the other day I went outside, I was having my coffee, and I look over, and I don't go outside and drink my coffee very often, but I did the other day, and I look over at the compost bin. I'm gonna share my screen. Huh. And this little mouse was trying to get in to the compost, and then I realized it was stuck. It actually couldn't get in, and it couldn't get out. Um, and I had an initial response of, you know, concern, compassion, and then a very real response of annoyedness, the irritation that I had been put in a situation where I needed to save an animal, that was like a plague as far as I'm concerned, right? There's another level at which it's like these things right now we're not in a mouse bloom, thankfully, but there are times where these blooms happen and there's just like gazillions of mice and you have to like, you're living like you have to close everything and it's just like uh they're living beings trying to survive and often they will do things that are destructive too and poisonous and all these things, to our own lives. And so there was this moment of like just petty irritation, of being like, I can't believe I have to do this, and it's like, oh my God. It was like a moment of like, being uh, it's like that honesty of seeing that part of oneself, right? And the part of myself of like doesn't want to save. Never mind, do I not want to save all beings? I don't want to save this mouse. I don't want. It's a sense of that responsibility and the burden of it, and the knowing of that. Amazing. Which beings do we sympathize with, right? These goats that come in, and when they're little, they're so cute. These wild goats that come through, they're beautiful, and then they're older and they're like super destructive, And where does that change that sense of like, oh, automatic sympathy and to like, oh God, these things are a pain, and so I did, of course, I went and it was not actually easy to get that mouse out. It was like, it took quite a while of like kind of gently like getting its little head out because I had to kind of like pull the hairs and get it. Anyway, got out, did not thank me, scampered off. But I did feel good about it afterwards. There was that sense of like, not only of, yeah, shame or whatever of like, oh, the notion that I wouldn't have done it, the possibility of that is like a awful thought, um, and then the good feeling of like caring for a little being, whether it's a mouse or a butterfly or, I mean, we encounter a being suffering. If you're sensitive and you're keeping your eyes open, actually go outside for coffee. You're going to find problems and that you may have some ability to, be a helpful agent in them. So that part of it felt good. But, so there is that sense of like that basic, like you can kind of bring it down to sort of one moment of caring for one small being and the goodness of that, but that even in that, there's like the other side of myself or ourselves, or that we don't necessarily feel proud about, or feel good about that kind of emotional response. But when you are in a condition you're in, which is like 24 hours a day, endless tasks, I'm sure, right? I mean, a lot of it is like just it's constant responsibility, some very mundane, sometimes perhaps like dramatic and scary and intense, that's to say just with the caretaking thing. And then, right, never mind your dogs, the one passing away and the other one being sick. I mean, that it's just kind of like what we describe, where when you have in an isolated moment, conditions are good, you have time and space, oh, to help someone and to do something is like a beautiful, easy gesture. And even then, you can see some of the, whatever impurities of the heart. But when it's constant and you're not getting time to recover, and you don't get to come up for air, and there's, that your whole environment and your day and your world and your social life and everything is kind of consumed by it, the grief and the bitterness and the resentment and the, sadness and all of those things that are, like you don't even have time to deal with them. Never mind like the space to feel it or the space to process. And um, so that's a problem. And I would say in some ways, the question of action, you got to a really beautiful place on your own with, the reflections. And so I don't want to kind of confuse it, because you got like, there's something about just the acknowledgement, right, of hardship and the reality of, our lives, and everyone's going to, we will, all these relationships will sever. You got to that on your own, right? So there's something like, we can say any million words about what equanimity is, but it's like that, what you're describing was, uh, it's such a relief. It's such a powerful thing. Like you expressed, to be able to, and it's, and it, and what, and how amazing that it's not a getting away from it. It's not getting out of the situation. It's like, actually the mind comes to rest in the truth, and it doesn't, nothing has changed about your external conditions, except for there's some moments of not just acceptance. It's like a strength of mind and a strength of that peacefulness that was available to you. And of course, that's the most profound aspect of this whole thing, that's what you're describing is possible, you know. And so, I, I don't want to, lose track of, like, you've already described the most important thing, then, like, whatever we have to say about action and how that's related to karma. But since you asked, I think it's not just external actions. And I think that's the thing. It's not just what you're doing for everyone else and your dogs and your partner. And, it's like, you actually have to realize that you are the owner of your actions for your own life, your own, that you're, the putting aside of your own interests and your own, like, as you said, right, you're losing your life. I can't remember the exact words you're using, putting aside your own interests, putting aside your own life. Where is there a beauty in that, and a beautiful sacrifice, and something that's like, if without that, where would humanity be without that capacity, And at what point are you betraying your own life? And what point are you undermining your own capacity to grow and to be happy in your decisions, in your actions that are probably often mostly really well motivated, but then there's another part that's just duty, right? And that there's nothing wrong with that, except when there is when you're not able to heal and kind of get to those kind of spaces enough, because you're constantly being asked to do everything. You That's not going to be sustainable. You're going to, you're going to burn out. You probably burnt out a long time ago, and that you can kind of dig that hole deeper and deeper. Now, so I mean, it doesn't have to be a answer here, but I mean, like, ultimately, my question to you would be, can you get a break? And can you build in breaks in a different way and have someone else help be able to get away for bigger times? I know often that ends up being like a financial question, but there's like, social networks, social people, social other relationships that might not take care of her as well as you do, but that might be an appropriate sacrifice in terms of perfection for your long-term, like, viability. So I know that's like a longer kind of thing, in terms, and I guess my mom. This There are so many, like, dimensions of what you're describing, and what I'll say of, like, what I went through, over the last couple of years, but in particularly those, 6 months in the beginning of this year, where I was back home, the primary caretaker. Um, and there's going to be parts of this that don't translate to your situation. But there feels like there's something I want to share, and we'll see. I don't know if it's a good idea. We'll see. There was the side of it where of course I was going to do it. There was no one else. There was there was no one else who was going to be able to do what I did. Definitely not nearly as well as I did. Um, and so it was a matter of love, devotion, duty, responsibility, totally being like, this is my karma, and like, of course, it's my mom. And so that was like one basic level of like every single thing. How many ambulance rides, or how many trips to the hospital, or how many whatever, all the things, and or just attending to her many needs and many wishes. And there was something also happening at that same time where I was like, I am going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to defend everything she wants in terms of the doctors, the hospitals, or whatever, um, and advocate for her position and her interests and her wishes and her way of doing it, even if I didn't always feel like they were what I would have done or felt like was maybe most appropriate. So there was, just to say, there was that level of like total devotion, surrender to the role, right? And there was also the reality that as much as she appreciated it, and as much as she loved me, and as much as she didn't want to hurt me, it became clear to me that she was willing to have me run myself into the ground for a prospect that didn't exist in terms of her own longevity. And it wasn't necessarily conscious on her part, and it wasn't something I think she would have, it was something she had an easy time recognizing, but it was something that eventually I realized that I um, realized at some point I needed to protect myself from, where she wasn't going to actually look out for me, and I needed to look out for me. And what that looked like was not much, but it was real. I mean, it was, there was a certain point in the spring where um, not this wasn't working. Nothing was working. She was dying, and it was very clear, but she didn't. She still had a lot of hope, and her doctors were not being honest with her, as far as I was concerned, or with themselves. And I mean, we were literally, calling 911 every week, and it was just, she was really not well, and so she just wanted to continue. And so I said to her, at some point, it wasn't like, out of the blue, but this took a lot of me really trying to tease out these things of like what. But I was at a point of like just such exhaustion and frustration and different, just that it was whatever. I was burnt out. That I needed a break. And so I said, if mom, if I don't think there's a way to say this that doesn't sound like very intense because it was very intense, but it was felt clear to me, which is like, Mom, I feel like you're dying, that this is what's happening, that the decision to try to keep fighting it and to keep prolonging it is not only is it going to not work, that it's going to make the next weeks, perhaps months, next period of time much worse, much more awful for you and also for me. And I'm at a point where I need a break. And so, because I'm exhausted. And so if you, and these are things that were in the air. I mean, we're talking about them. If you decide to go into hospice and we decide that you're going to stop fighting and we're going to stop going to the ER and we're going to, we're going to try to like help you feel comfortable through this and we're going to enjoy spring and do whatever we can, I will stay and I will like stay through that. But if you're going to keep doing this, I need a break. And your brother and sister can come and they can help take care of you for a couple of weeks and I'll be back. Something emergency happens, I'll come back right away. But right now, I need 3 weeks to get back home and deal with things and attend to things um, and like get some space. And I know your siblings will not do as good a job as but they'll be fine. And they don't make cream of wheat as perfectly as I do, and they don't make your morning latte like I do, but they'll figure it out. You know what I mean? Like they'll figure it out. And it didn't go well. She was, she really felt like I was betraying her, that I was abandoning her, which was,
It felt that way to you, or it felt that way to her?
it felt that way to her. And that that was difficult to me to hear that because I felt like I had just I mean, because I had just like it's like you can't believe how much you have done, right? And that there's like something was gone in terms of her capacity to really fathom the toll that was taking on me, and how actually how unfair it was and inappropriate, and that it was totally appropriate actually to like let me have a break, um, but that I had to kind of leave on those terms, and be willing to know that with all my best intentions, she could die actually when I was away, and um, that I knew I was risking that, and of course she knew that, and that was her like biggest fear. Um, and so I had to do that, right? I mean, I had to make the decision to leave, of course, coordinate it with other people, and came home for 3 weeks. Some people probably remember that to some degree that I was back in Hawaii for a little while before I went back, and you know, it was like messy with her siblings, but it was actually really important, right? Actually, even though it wasn't as perfect and as graceful perhaps, it was actually like really important that she had this time with her siblings alone, and that they worked out stuff and had their arguments but also had their healing, and it's like that sense of like actually there are other relationships that matter and that are important to go through these hard times with. And of course, totally fortunately, she made it through those 3 weeks, and I went home, and then I can't remember what we had. It was maybe 3 more weeks before she passed away, but I got to come home and I got my rest, and thank God. And I really don't, and like I wouldn't have been able to do those final 3 weeks if I hadn't had that break, and if I hadn't taken care of myself and been willing to risk, you know, I mean, the feeling that you've betrayed someone or that they feel like you've betrayed them, and of course, you know, some sense of doubt in that, and um, but that willingness to take care of myself and to not betray myself for the sake of even. No, I mean, I didn't feel like it was at the cost of her health and well-being, but certainly putting something at risk, not as perfectly, you know. And this is a story of why I'm not a bodhisattva. Um, but I offer that of like to say that it's like it was very difficult. Yes, I mean, of course, I come on Zoom and I'm not sobbing about my mom. I mean, you know, there's some piece of like, you know, I have a role here, and there's a, you know, but it's not like I have not sobbed about my mom, you know, or that there's not a lot of like, you know, continued emotions and processing around it, you know. But I offer that particular piece around you because you're in a different situation that actually is more scary to me, right? Which is that like there's not necessarily I knew my mom was dying, and I knew that there was going to be some end to it, and even if I had to stay, I would have made it through. I may have maybe hurt myself, and the question of would I have hurt myself in a way that would have been irreparable? I mean, I don't know, but that's you know, it's always a concern. You can dig pretty deep holes in terms of like these things. And so you are in a situation where it's like, I don't know the details, but it sounds like, you know, there's the possibility of an even longer process, that you've already been at it since December. And that I just feel like that process of like balancing, negotiating, and that we have limits, actually. We have limits to our capacity to do things well, and that you don't want to be embittered by it. Like you actually don't want to end this however it ends and whenever it happens, just angry at her and frustrated or bitter about what the years you've lost or whatever it might be. And that was something I definitely felt with my mom, where I'm like, oh, I can't do this. And it won't be her fault actually if I do that. It'll be my fault because I didn't take care of myself. That's not her responsibility ultimately, sadly, of the people we love the most and our partners and our parents and these people who we think are actually the ones who may be supposed to take care of us. That's true on some level. And then there is this part of like, actually, we are the owners of our actions. Our happiness and sorrow are not dependent upon our wishes for their wishes for us, but upon our own actions, right? The phrases, the equanimity piece. And so,
Kamasaka,
exactly. Going back to your
kamasaka,
question, kamasaka
kamasaka.
is the answer. And I just really feel like I hope that there is some way that you can reflect on your situation, reflect on whatever the other resources that are available in terms of your social network, in terms of family, in terms of whatever, to feel like you need to pace yourself differently in this. It's not sustainable, and you don't want to hurt yourself in a way that's harder and harder to recover from. You don't want to hurt your relationship, and to get that like actually you would be a better caretaker with a little more like juice going into your own life and your own self, where that's not just this, you know, and that you won't regret it. I mean, you won't regret caring for her, right? And you won't, I mean, it's beautiful, and so you're going to feel good about that. And there's doesn't mean that you have to do it totally to the degree. uh, 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 there may be situations in which you just do. I get that, right? This tree, there's no way around it, these trees. So there are some times where there's no other option, but I think sometimes there's the willingness to look at more creative options and to have a less perfect scenario, but that one that is has maybe unexpected fruits, unexpected benefits, but also has the hope for an expected benefit of actually caring for yourself a little more. So,
I got the light on.
yes,
um,
good.
Jesse, I so appreciate you talking about your experience with your mother, and much of it resonated with me. I can't tell you, one of our emergency room visits was the doctor asked Jan about her wanting a CPR if her heart stopped. And
Mm,
I'd been trying to talk to her about this, and he knew that I was advocating for her to change it to DNR. And he took down his mask and he sat down and he had a long conversation with her. And at the end of that, she said, "Okay, I think you're right. I think I should change it to DNR." And I was so grateful. I was so grateful. That's exactly what I needed him to do. I wrote him a thank you note several weeks later. I got his name. I wrote his name down. You know, it was an ER doctor. And I was so grateful that that happened because I'd been trying to get her to do that. I mean, I am trying to advocate for myself in many ways. And yeah, I'm in the process of trying to figure out how we can't afford caregivers, but how I can make it possible and get her on Medicaid so that we can have Medicaid pay for caregivers. But it means, you know, it means a lot of
paperwork.
it's a lot of mishigas, and
Mhm.
but if I hire people, it makes it more likely. So I am investigating, and I know that I can't. I mean, I wrecked my back with the first broken arm, trying to help her get up, and um, and I've been recovering for that ever since. But
Mm.
yeah, it's a you know, I've thought about how my life was a piece of cake until I hit 70. And if I ever complained about anything and was ever hopeless and sad and depressed, that was nothing compared to this. It was absolutely nothing. And I'm grateful when I look back at my life, and gee, was I an ungrateful wretch, not knowing how easy it was. Because this is it's difficult. It's really difficult. So I do appreciate you sharing that because a lot of it resonated with me. You know,
Mm.
it's a difficult dance trying to figure out how to retain my integrity and my choice, and also to give wholeheartedly without somehow diminishing her. You know, when somebody has dementia,
Mm.
it's difficult.
It's it's a whole different ball game, Annie, you know,
Yeah,
and it's like it changes everything.
it
I
changes
really feel
everything.
like it changes everything. And you can't, one of the things I notice is that I can't get angry at the things I used to get angry at because it's not this person's fault anymore.
Right.
And it's like amazing because it actually doesn't come up because it's just, it doesn't even, it's just completely different.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that it isn't harder. I don't mean to say it's not harder, but it's definitely, it's like a different dimension you're in.
Yeah, I mean, you
Probably,
just have to throw up your hands and go,
yeah,
eh,
yeah. Yeah, oh well. Oh
oh, well,
well. Oh well. Yeah. So
Mm.
yeah,
only going to get worse.
exact exactly. Enjoy every little bit that you can.
Right.
That's
In a
what I
couple of
that's
years,
what
I'll be saying, oh, this was a cakewalk.
Right.
yeah,
When I was
yeah.
75, this was a cakewalk.
Oh God. I doubt it
And
at this point. Yeah.
enjoy every little bit of lucidity or goodness that you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Annie.
Hmm.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah. Mm. Take good care. See you next week.